You look away when someone tries to hold your gaze, not because you're shy, not because you're disinterested, but because eye contact feels like being seen through, like someone is reaching inside and touching something you've spent years learning to hide. Most people think avoiding eye contact means you're lying or insecure or socially awkward, but that's not the whole truth. Sometimes avoiding eye contact means you're carrying something so heavy, so raw, that direct connection feels dangerous. It means your nervous system learned a long time ago that being seen leads to being hurt, that vulnerability is a trap, that the safest place to be is invisible. When you were young, maybe eye contact meant criticism was coming. Maybe it meant you were about to be shamed or judged or told everything you were doing wrong. So your brain wired itself to associate direct gaze with threat. And now, years later, even when you're safe, even when the person looking at you means no harm, your body still reacts like danger is imminent. You break the gaze, you look down, you find something else to focus on. And everyone assumes it's about confidence when really it's about survival. But here's what nobody tells you about people who avoid eye contact. They're not weak, they're not broken, they're hyper-aware. They're so tuned into the emotional undercurrents of every interaction that sustained eye contact feels overwhelming, like they're absorbing too much information, too much intensity, too much of the other person's energy. And in a world that constantly demands you to perform connection, to prove you're present by maintaining eye contact, being someone who can't do that easily feels like failing at being human. And then there's what happens when someone ignores you, when they read your message and don't respond, when they're active online but silent toward you, when they're clearly choosing not to engage. Most people will tell you it means they're busy, that they forgot, that it's not personal. But deep down, you know what it really means. Being ignored is a message, a loud, clear message that says you are not a priority, that your presence or absence makes no difference to them, that they can go about their day without a single thought of you. And the cruelest part is that ignoring someone is a form of control, a way of keeping you in limbo, of maintaining power by making you wait, by making you wonder, by keeping you in a state of uncertainty where you're always trying to figure out what you did wrong or how to get their attention back. Because when someone genuinely cares about you, when you matter to them, they don't ignore you. They might be busy, they might take time to respond, but they acknowledge you. They let you know you're on their mind. They don't leave you hanging in silence. Ignoring is intentional, even when it's passive, even when the person doing it tells themselves they're just overwhelmed or forgot. The truth is, we make time for what matters to us. We respond to people we care about, and silence is its own form of communication. It's saying without words that you don't matter enough to warrant even the smallest effort, and that knowing, that understanding the truth behind the silence, is one of the most isolating feelings in the world. You're left questioning everything, replaying conversations, wondering if you imagined the connection, if you were always more invested than they were, if you're fundamentally unworthy of basic consideration. And the darkest part is that being ignored activates the same pain centers in your brain as physical injury. Your nervous system doesn't differentiate between being socially excluded and being physically hurt, so when someone ignores you, your body literally experiences it as pain, as rejection, as evidence that you're not safe, not valued, not enough. Now let's talk about the people who stay up late, who can't seem to fall asleep at a normal hour, who are most alive when the rest of the world is sleeping. Society labels them lazy, undisciplined, irresponsible. But here's what's really happening. People who stay up late are often running from something, using the quiet dark hours as the only time they feel safe enough to actually be themselves, to actually feel their feelings, to drop the mask they wear all day. During the day, they're performing, they're managing other people's needs and expectations, they're in survival mode, and their nervous system never gets a chance to relax. But at night, when everyone else is asleep, when there are no demands, no interruptions, no need to be anything other than who they are, they finally exhale. They finally feel like they can think, can create, can exist without being observed or judged. And for some people, staying up late is the only way they know how to reclaim time for themselves, to carve out a few hours where they're not responsible for anyone, where they don't have to be productive or useful or on. It's not about poor sleep hygiene or lack of discipline, it's about needing space to breathe in a life that doesn't give them any during daylight hours. But there's a darker side too. People who stay up late are often deeply lonely, using the night to avoid the intimacy and vulnerability that comes with sharing a bed and a sleep schedule with someone. Or they're staying up because lying down in the dark brings all the thoughts they've been running from all day crashing back. The moment their head hits the pillow, the anxiety surfaces, the regrets replay, the existential dread takes over. So they stay up scrolling, watching, distracting, doing anything to avoid being alone with themselves in the quiet. And the longer this pattern goes on, the more their body adapts to it, the more their circadian rhythm shifts, until they genuinely can't fall asleep at a normal hour even when they try. Their brain has been trained that nighttime is for hypervigilance, for processing, for staying alert. And sleep feels like surrender, like letting go of control. And that's terrifying when control is the only thing that's kept them safe. Here's something most people miss entirely. When someone laughs when they're nervous, when they giggle during serious conversations, when they smile at inappropriate times, it's not because they think things are funny. It's because their nervous system is trying to discharge the overwhelming energy of discomfort. Laughter is a pressure valve, a way the body tries to regulate itself when emotions are too big, too intense, too threatening to feel directly. So the person who laughs when they're scared, who smiles when they're being confronted, who makes jokes when they should be crying, that person isn't being disrespectful or disconnected. They're drowning in feeling and trying desperately to stay afloat. And the cruelest part is that this response often gets them in trouble, makes people think they don't care, don't take things seriously, are mocking the situation when really they're in crisis. They're laughing because if they don't laugh, they might completely fall apart. Because laughter is the only socially acceptable way to express that they're overwhelmed. Because they learned early on that showing real emotion wasn't safe, so they had to find another outlet. And if you're someone who does this, if you're someone who laughs at the worst possible moments, and then hates yourself for it, I need you to know that this isn't a character flaw. It's a trauma response. It's your body trying to protect you the only way it knows how. And you can learn other ways to regulate, other ways to discharge that nervous energy. But you have to start with compassion for why you developed this response in the first place. You have to understand that the part of you that laughs when you want to cry is the part that kept you safe when there was no other option, and it deserves kindness, not judgment. And then there are the people who remember small details about you, who bring up something you mentioned weeks ago in passing, who notice when you change your hair or seem quieter than usual, who remember your coffee order or the name of your childhood pet or the thing you said you were worried about. Most people will tell you this means they care, that they're attentive, that they're good at relationships. And sometimes that's true. But sometimes, people who remember everything are people who had to become hyper-vigilant to survive, who learned to track every detail of the people around them because their safety depended on it. They remember because they were the kids who had to monitor their parents' mood to know if it was safe to ask for something, who had to notice every shift in tone or body language to predict when anger was coming, who became experts at reading people because missing a cue could mean emotional or physical harm. So now, as adults, they remember everything about you not just because they care, which they might, but because their nervous system is still running that old program of hypervigilance, still scanning for information, still trying to stay one step ahead of danger, even when there is no danger. They notice what you don't say as much as what you do say. They track inconsistencies, they file away details, and it can feel like love, like incredible attentiveness. But it can also be exhausting for them because they can't turn it off. They're always monitoring, always analyzing, always trying to predict and manage. And underneath that seemingly beautiful quality of remembering everything is often a person who never feels truly safe, who can never just relax into a relationship without their vigilance radar running in the background. Let me tell you about something that happens in the hidden corners of human interaction, something most people do, but nobody talks about. When you share something vulnerable with someone, when you open up about a fear or a wound or a struggle, pay attention to what they do with that information later. Because some people will hold it gently, will honor the trust you placed in them, will never use your vulnerability against you. But other people, the ones you need to be careful of, they'll store that information like ammunition, and the moment there's conflict, the moment you're no longer useful to them or you challenge them in any way, they'll weaponize what you shared. They'll throw your trauma back in your face, they'll mock your insecurities, they'll use the very thing you trusted them with as proof that you're broken or damaged or unworthy. And this is one of the darkest aspects of human behavior, the way some people collect your vulnerabilities not to understand you better, but to have leverage, to maintain power. to ensure that they always have something to hurt you with, if they need to. If you've ever experienced this, if you've ever had someone use your deepest pain against you, you know how violating it feels, how it makes you want to never be vulnerable again, never trust again, never let anyone see the real you. And you have to be so careful, so discerning about who you open up to, because not everyone who asks deserves access. Not everyone who seems safe actually is. And some people are only interested in your vulnerability because it makes them feel powerful to know your weaknesses. And I need to pause here for a second, because if these dark truths are resonating with you, if you're recognizing yourself or your experiences in what I'm describing, I want you to leave a comment. Something simple. Something honest. Maybe it's, I remember everything because I had to. Or, I've been ignored and it broke me. Or, I laugh when I should cry. Whatever it is, put it out there. Because naming these patterns is how you start to break their hold on you. And when you comment, you're not just helping yourself. You're creating a thread of connection for everyone else reading who feels the same way but thought they were alone in it. So go ahead, leave your comment, be brave enough to acknowledge what you recognize in yourself, and know that I see every single one, and you're not alone in this. Now let's keep going deeper. There's something that happens with people who've been hurt repeatedly, who've experienced betrayal or abandonment or abuse, and it's this. They develop what looks like intuition, but is actually hypervigilance disguised as gut feeling. They can walk into a room and immediately sense the energy. They can tell when someone is lying or hiding something. They can predict when a relationship is about to end before any obvious signs appear. And people around them are amazed, think they're psychic or incredibly intuitive. But here's the truth. That's not a gift, that's a wound. That's a nervous system that's been trained through repeated trauma to constantly scan for danger, to notice micro-expressions and tonal shifts and behavioral patterns that signal threat. They're not more intuitive than other people. They're more traumatized, and their brain has adapted by becoming hyper-aware of everything because missing a warning sign could mean getting hurt again. And the exhausting part is that they can't turn it off. They're always reading people, always analyzing, always waiting for the other shoe to drop, and it makes genuine connection almost impossible because they're never fully present, never fully relaxed. Always part of them is monitoring and protecting and preparing for the worst. And yes, sometimes their predictions are right. Sometimes they do sense things others miss, but they also false alarm constantly, seeing threats that aren't there, ending relationships prematurely because their nervous system convinced them betrayal was coming, living in a state of perpetual defensive readiness that pushes away the very connection they're desperate for. Let's talk about something darker, something that reveals the ugliest parts of human nature. When someone is going through something terrible, when they're experiencing grief or trauma or a genuine crisis, pay attention to who stays and who disappears. Because some people can't handle other people's pain, not because they're busy or overwhelmed, but because witnessing suffering makes them uncomfortable, forces them to confront the reality that bad things happen to good people, that life is unpredictable and scary, that they could be next. So they ghost, they pull away, they stop calling or texting, and they tell themselves it's because they don't know what to say or they want to give you space, but really they're protecting themselves from the discomfort of your pain. They're choosing their comfort over your crisis. And that's a devastating thing to discover about people you thought cared about you. And the people who do stay, the ones who sit with you in your darkest moments, who don't try to fix you or rush you through your grief, who can just be present with your pain without making it about them, those people are rare, and they're showing you something precious about their character. They're showing you they're not afraid of the hard stuff. They're not going to abandon you when you're not shiny and happy and easy to be around. They're in it for real. But here's the shadow side of that too. Some people are only interested in you when you're in crisis, when you need them, when they can play savior or helper or the strong one. The moment you start healing, the moment you don't need them anymore, they lose interest. They create distance. They might even sabotage your progress, because their identity is tied to being needed. These are the people who love broken things because fixing you makes them feel valuable. But they can't handle you being whole because whole you doesn't need them the same way. And that threatens their sense of purpose. Here's something about anger that most people completely misunderstand. When someone is angry all the time, when they seem to rage over small things, when they're constantly irritable and quick to blow up, it's not actually about anger. Anger is almost always a secondary emotion, a mask for something deeper and more vulnerable. Underneath chronic anger is usually fear, or hurt, or shame, or grief. Emotions that feel too dangerous to express directly. So they get converted into anger because anger feels safer, more powerful, more controllable. The person who's always angry is often someone who's deeply afraid but can't admit it. Someone who's been hurt so many times they'd rather be mad than let anyone see how much they're bleeding inside. And anger keeps people at a distance, which is exactly what a wounded person needs. A way to ensure no one gets close enough to hurt them again. But the cost of living in chronic anger is devastating. It destroys relationships, it damages your body, it keeps you trapped in a cycle of reactivity that makes healing impossible. And until the angry person is willing to look underneath the rage, to feel the fear or hurt or shame they're protecting, nothing changes. The anger just keeps erupting, keeps burning bridges, keeps confirming their deepest belief that everyone will hurt them, or leave them, or let them down, because the anger itself ensures that's exactly what happens. There's a particularly dark aspect of human psychology that shows up in how we treat people who are too kind, too giving, too available. The person who's always there for everyone, who never says no, who puts everyone else's needs before their own, that person doesn't get rewarded for their goodness. They get exploited. Because people, even good people, will take as much as you're willing to give, will keep asking for more as long as you keep saying yes, will drain you completely if you let them. And it's not because they're monsters, it's because humans are wired to conserve energy, to take the path of least resistance, and if you make yourself the easy option, if you never push back or set limits, people will unconsciously come to see you as an unlimited resource. They'll stop appreciating what you do because it's expected. It's just what you do. And they'll start resenting you the moment you can't deliver because you've trained them to depend on your constant availability. And the cruelest irony is that the kind, giving person is often doing this because they believe their worth is tied to their usefulness, because they think if they stop giving they'll be abandoned. But the very behavior they think is keeping people close is actually preventing real intimacy. Because relationships built on you endlessly giving and them endlessly taking aren't relationships, they're transactions. And the moment you stop performing your role, the whole thing collapses. Real connection requires boundaries, requires reciprocity, requires both people being willing to give and receive. But the person who never learned they're valuable just for existing, not for what they provide, will keep giving until there's nothing left. Let me tell you something about the way people bond over shared trauma or shared pain. Because this is something that looks like connection, but is actually something much more complicated. When two people meet and both have been through similar wounds, similar betrayals, similar kinds of suffering, there's an instant recognition, an immediate sense of being understood in a way that feels rare and precious. And that can be beautiful. That can be the foundation of genuine connection. But it can also become toxic, can become a relationship where both people are so invested in their shared identity as wounded that neither one is allowed to heal. They keep each other stuck, keep reinforcing the narrative of how damaged they are, how the world hurt them, how they're different from everyone else because of what they've been through. And anytime one person starts to grow, starts to move past the pain, starts to build a life that isn't defined by trauma, the other person feels threatened, feels abandoned, feels like they're being left behind. So they pull them back, consciously or unconsciously. They remind them of the pain. They create drama or crisis to keep them engaged in the old patterns. This is trauma bonding. And it's one of the most insidious forms of connection because it feels so intense, so deep. But it's not built on love or true intimacy. It's built on mutual dysfunction, on both people needing each other to stay broken so they don't have to face their healing alone. And here's something about silence that most people don't recognize as aggressive. When someone gives you the silent treatment, when they punish you with withdrawal and refusal to engage, that's not passive. That's active cruelty. It's a form of emotional abuse that's designed to make you feel crazy, to make you chase them, to make you apologize for things you may not have even done just to get them to acknowledge you again. The silent treatment is about control, about training you to fear their withdrawal so much that you'll do anything to avoid it. So you'll shrink yourself, betray your own boundaries, accept unacceptable behavior just to keep them from going silent again. And the person who uses the silent treatment will often claim they just need space, they just need time to process, but there's a difference between taking space and weaponizing silence. Taking space is I need a few hours to think about this. Let's talk later tonight. Weaponizing silence is disappearing for days, refusing to communicate, leaving you in agonizing uncertainty about where you stand. One is healthy boundary setting, the other is manipulation. And if you're in a relationship with someone who regularly uses silence as punishment, you need to understand that this pattern will never stop unless they take full responsibility for it and actively work to change it. And most people who use the silent treatment don't see it as a problem. They see it as justified, as your fault for making them so upset they had no choice but to shut you out. Now let's talk about something that happens with people who have been gaslit, who have had their reality consistently denied or distorted by someone they trusted. Gaslighting doesn't just make you question specific events or conversations. It makes you question your entire perception of reality, your ability to trust your own mind, your sanity itself. And once someone has successfully gaslit you, once they've convinced you that your memory is unreliable, that your feelings are overreactions, that your intuition is wrong, they can control you completely because you stop trusting yourself and start relying on them to tell you what's real. This is psychological warfare, and it's devastatingly effective because it attacks the very foundation of your sense of self. People who've been gaslit often develop this habit of constantly second-guessing themselves, of prefacing every statement with, "I think," or "maybe I'm wrong, but," of apologizing for their perceptions and feelings, of seeking external validation for things they should be able to trust in themselves. And even after they leave the relationship where the gaslighting happened, even after they know intellectually that they were being manipulated, the damage persists. They struggle to make decisions, they overthink everything, they're terrified of being wrong or misremembering or misunderstanding, and it takes years of conscious work to rebuild the ability to trust their own mind again. And if you're still with me, if you're feeling the weight of these dark truths settling into your bones, I want to acknowledge how hard it is to look at the shadow side of human behavior, to recognize these patterns in yourself or in people you love. This kind of knowledge isn't comfortable. It doesn't make you feel good, but it does make you powerful. Because once you understand these psychological dynamics, once you can see them playing out in real time, you can protect yourself, you can make different choices, you can stop being confused by behavior that once made no sense. And if this content is speaking to you, if you want to keep exploring these uncomfortable truths, if you want to be part of a community that's willing to look at the hard stuff instead of pretending everything is fine, I'd love for you to subscribe to this channel. Not because I'm trying to sell you something, but because I genuinely believe that understanding the dark psychology of human behavior is one of the most important things you can do for your own protection and healing. Every week I dive deep into topics that most people are afraid to discuss. Topics that reveal the truth about why people do what they do. And if you want to keep learning, keep growing, keep seeing more clearly, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss anything. This is about building awareness, building resilience, building the ability to navigate a world where not everyone has good intentions, and I want you to have every tool possible to protect yourself and thrive. Let's talk about envy, because this is one of the most toxic and hidden emotions humans experience. Envy isn't just wanting what someone else has. It's wanting them to not have it. It's resenting their success or happiness or good fortune so much that you'd rather see them fail than see them thrive. And the darkest part about envy is how it masquerades as other things, as criticism, as concern, as helpful advice, when really, it's just poisonous resentment dressed up in socially acceptable language. The person who's envious of you will subtly undermine you, will find ways to diminish your accomplishments, will always have a but or a yeah however ready whenever you share good news. They'll say they're happy for you while their body language screams the opposite. They'll praise you in ways that actually make you feel worse. They'll give you advice that, if you followed it, would sabotage you. And envy is particularly dangerous because the envious person often doesn't even consciously realize what they're doing. They've convinced themselves they're being realistic or protective or honest, when really they're just trying to cut you down to a size they're comfortable with. And if you're someone who has achieved things, who's grown, who's become successful or happy or free, you will encounter envy, and you need to be able to recognize it and protect yourself from it. Because envious people will stay in your life as long as you let them, slowly poisoning your confidence, making you doubt your success, making you feel guilty for having what they don't, and they'll never be satisfied until you're as miserable as they are. Here's something about people who constantly play the victim. who have a story for why everything bad happens to them and none of it is ever their fault. Chronic victimhood is not about actual victimization. It's about avoiding responsibility, avoiding growth, avoiding the terrifying possibility that they have power to change their circumstances. Because if nothing is ever your fault, if you're always just responding to what others do to you, then you never have to look at your patterns, your choices, your role in creating or perpetuating your own suffering. And the victim identity becomes addictive because it comes with secondary gains, it gets you sympathy and attention, it makes people feel sorry for you and try to help you, it allows you to stay stuck without having to admit you're choosing to stay stuck. But the cost of chronic victimhood is agency, power, the ability to actually change anything. And people in victim mode will exhaust everyone around them, will drain their support systems dry, because nothing anyone does is ever enough. No advice works, no help helps, because deep down they don't actually want solutions, they want validation for staying exactly where they are. And if you try to point out their patterns, if you gently suggest they might have some responsibility for their situation, they'll turn on you, they'll add you to the list of people who hurt them, who didn't understand, who abandoned them when they needed support. The chronic victim is a black hole of need that can never be filled because the need isn't for help. It's for permission to never grow. Let me tell you about something that happens in intimate relationships that's so subtle most people never catch it. Some people stay with partners they don't actually love, don't actually want to be with, because leaving would mean admitting they wasted years, made a mistake, failed at something important. This is called sunk cost fallacy. And it keeps people trapped in dead or even toxic relationships for decades, because the thought of walking away feels like losing all the time and energy and effort they've already invested. So they stay, they keep trying to make it work, they keep hoping it'll get better, but underneath they know. They've always known. It's not right, it was never right, and every day they stay is another day they're stealing from their own life. Another day they're choosing a mediocre or miserable present, because they can't let go of the past. And the cruelest part is that the longer they stay, the harder it becomes to leave, because now there's even more investment, even more history, even more reasons why leaving would mean admitting failure. So they stay until they're old, until it's been so long they can't imagine any other life, until they look back and realize they sacrificed their one chance at genuine love and happiness because they couldn't admit they made a wrong choice 20 years ago. Here's something about loyalty that sounds noble but is actually toxic. Some people mistake loyalty for the inability to leave, for staying with people who hurt them repeatedly, for defending the indefensible because they made a commitment or shared history, or because leaving would feel like betrayal. But real loyalty isn't about blind devotion. It's not about staying no matter what. It's about choosing someone again and again because they're worthy of being chosen, because they treat you well, because the relationship adds value to your life. Toxic loyalty is what keeps people in abusive relationships, what makes people defend family members who are harmful, what prevents people from setting boundaries with friends who consistently disrespect them. And the person trapped in toxic loyalty will often judge others for leaving, will pride themselves on being someone who never gives up, who always stays, who's faithful no matter what, not realizing that their inability to leave isn't strength, it's fear, it's codependency, it's a wound masquerading as a virtue. Because sometimes the most loyal thing you can do, the most loving thing you can do, is to leave, to refuse to participate in a dynamic that's destroying both people, to have enough respect for yourself to walk away from someone who's consistently hurting you. And here's the final dark truth I want to leave you with, the one that underlies all the others. Most people will never do the work required to heal, to change, to break their patterns. They'll read things like this, they'll nod along, they'll recognize themselves in every word, and then they'll close the video and go right back to living exactly the same way they always have. Because knowledge isn't transformation, awareness isn't healing, and understanding why you do something doesn't automatically stop you from doing it. Real change requires sustained effort, requires facing things you've spent your whole life avoiding, requires being willing to feel uncomfortable for months or years, while you rewire patterns that have been running on autopilot since childhood. And most people aren't willing to do that. Most people would rather stay comfortable in their dysfunction than risk the temporary discomfort of growth. So they'll keep attracting the same kinds of people, keep ending up in the same kinds of situations, keep suffering in the same kinds of ways, and they'll wonder why nothing ever changes, why they can't catch a break, why they're so unlucky. And the answer is simple but devastating. Nothing changes because they don't change. And they don't change because change is hard, and staying the same is easy, even when staying the same is killing them. So if you're someone who actually wants to break the cycle, who's willing to do the uncomfortable work of transformation, who's ready to stop being a passive observer of your own life and start actively creating something different, you're rare. You're part of a small percentage of people who are brave enough to face themselves honestly. And that courage, that willingness to look at the dark parts and heal them, that's what will set you free. The patterns we've talked about, the dark psychology, the manipulation, the trauma responses, all of it can be understood, can be changed, can be healed. But only if you're willing to do the work, and only you can decide if you are.